everyone.
This conference will now be recorded.
Wednesday, the 9th of June, and welcome you all to this month's GRN Webinar, How to Visualize HR Data with Impact. So first of all, we have a few new members in the room today. So for those who don't know me, my name is Dan Hawes, and I'm the GRB co-founder. So I co-founded the GRB Group back in 1997 after I graduated in business studies from Brighton University with a friend of mine. The GRB Group, as we've now become, have grown to become the go-to platform for high caliber university students, recent graduates, alumni and employers. We have over 48 staff based in Brighton and over 2,000 clients across all sectors, companies such as the Post Office, IBM, Unilever and Ocado, to name but a few big name companies, but also several fast-growing SMEs or startups that need graduate talent to grow. In that time, our recruitment experts have successfully matched over 8,000 graduates with full-time graduate or executive level jobs. So the GRB Group has adapted over the last 12 months. So many of you will be familiar with the Graduate Recruitment Bureau. That's the search and selection arm of our business. So we help organisations with contingency recruitment or RPO or volume recruitment for all graduate roles across the UK. GRN, well, that's the Graduate Recruiters Network, and I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Graduate Mentor. Now, some of you may be aware of this, and I've noticed some of you are actually volunteering on the platform, which is wonderful. This is something we set up back in August 2020, mainly to mitigate the effects of the pandemic on those graduating students hitting a very, very weakened jobs market. The idea being that we get a range of volunteers from different backgrounds to offer free one-to-one mentoring with students and graduates all over the UK. And that's growing from strength to strength. We have almost 200 mentors who've kindly volunteered on the platform, and we've had over 600 sessions, many of which have actually led to employment for those students and graduates, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, and that kind of thing. So I'm delighted to announce Graduate Mentor that we launched last year. Rising Stars, this is a program we've been running for over 10 years now, where we showcase the top 50 graduating students that we have on our books, and it acts as a kind of a shop window for employers who are interested in really attracting the best of the best each year. That's called Rising Stars. Student Startup, again, that's been going for about 10 years, and that's a group for students who are particularly looking to start their own business, as we appreciate not every student and graduate looks to go into employment straight away, and we deal with quite a few entrepreneurial students through their time at university. So we've grouped them together and we discuss how they can help start their new enterprise. Student Diaries, many of you are subscribers to this. This is a monthly podcast where I interview 3 students and find out what it's like to be a student right now, which for many employers is fascinating because they haven't been able to actually go on campus and see students face to face. So that's an interesting insight into the lives of students right now. We also manage several LinkedIn groups, which you can find if you search for them. Not just Graduate Recruitment Bureau, but also GRN has a LinkedIn group. But we also have groups for students. So we're able to give access to employers to get involved and actually have discussions with students on LinkedIn, which is growing, as you can imagine, right now. We also have 2 divisions that help recruiters who are looking for graduates with up to 5 years experience. So Cortex focuses on the IT side and Metrica focuses on the analytical or the data science side. So those 2 divisions are our experienced hire divisions. So that gives you an overview of the GRB Group as it stands today. So, as I said at the start, we do have a few new members in the room today, so welcome to you all, and also our existing members today. We've got over 100 of you have all booked in to listen to this webinar. So I'd just like to give you some background as to our journey so far. So it was set up by GRB back in January 2009, originally for our clients. And also we extended that to our friends. So organisations who are involved with graduate recruitment, such as university careers service people. So I'm delighted to have a nice mix of over 2,900 members right now. So the idea is we bring together HR advisors, HR business partners, recruitment directors, and talent leads to discuss current topics presented by a mix of relevant and influential speakers. The emphasis being that members share best practice in a confidential environment. It enhances your learning and ultimately helps you become even better graduate recruiters. We have 2,986 members when I checked earlier, and that's an increase of 39 since we did our last webinar, so that's brilliant. The majority are FTSE 100 firms, but we also said at the start we have fast-growing SMEs and startups. And it covers all sectors, so there's a really nice broad spectrum of people who are members of GRN, and that makes for some really interesting debate, and it makes it really valuable to recruiters from all backgrounds. So as a member, it's free to join. You get invites to these webinars, which are on a monthly basis. We also have other special events throughout the year. You get access to the LinkedIn forum, where we have lots of discussions about topics of the day. I update a blog from time to time with any research or surveys that we hear about. And also we put out a quarterly newsletter with a roundup of anything that's going on in graduate recruitment. If it doesn't happen, you know, we are aware of it. So that gives you instant access to a huge range of information, which currently isn't out there. Now, there are extra benefits if you're interested in becoming a VIP member, which for only £299 per year represents very, very good value for money. So contact me if you're interested in being a VIP GRN member. So we are delighted to have our speaker in today. Just before I introduce Kerry through to you, I think it's always interesting to know who else is in the room. So I did a word cloud of all the people who have booked into the webinar today. So you can see front and center, the majority of you are early talent managers. You're either involved with HR, talent acquisition, careers in general, employability, that kind of thing. So everyone in the room is has a vested interest in graduate recruitment. So we're delighted to have you all here today. So the agenda. We've got Kerry, a data communications consultant and trainer, and she's going to be sharing ways to present your data and metrics that give lasting visual impact through clear graphs, imagery, and charts. And when she's spoken for about 35-40 minutes, perhaps, there'll be the opportunity for you to ask any questions. Now, the chat facility is there for you to use. Post your questions in there. I'll be keeping an eye on them, and I'll put them to Kerry at the end. And then at 1:30, we'll cover any other business, and you'll be free to go. Now, just to note, this is being recorded, so if you do have to duck out or you can't make it for whatever reason, then I will send you a link to the YouTube channel. So, Kerry, I found Kerry because she had done a presentation with CIPD, and it looked very, very interesting and something we'd never covered before. And a lot of HR professionals are involved in presenting data, and there are lots of new ways and clever ways to present this with impact. So she has over 15 years experience working in data science, leading teams, developing analytical solutions, and informing strategy for market-leading brands, many of them you'll have heard of, such as eBay, Amex, and Sainsbury's. So a wealth of experience that she's going to share with you right now. So I'm going to make Kerry a presenter right now. Just bear with me and hand you over to her.
Apologies for the late arrival here. Hopefully you can see and hear me now.
Yeah, that's good.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you for that introduction, Dan, and thank you for inviting me to speak here today. I'm just going to check you can't see this little sort of, okay, I've got a little image bar on the top of my screen, which I'm just clicking around on. I think I need to leave it there. But yeah, I mean, apologies up front for any sort of cold and flu vibes you're getting from me. Usually I sound quite a bit healthier, but hopefully it won't affect what I have to share on the topic of visualizing HR data with impact. So I just wanted to start by reflecting on this word, impact. You know, it's a word that's used a lot when it comes to what we want to achieve when we communicate with data, what we get from data, and that's, you know, any sort of data, HR data or otherwise. And the thing about this word is it often means different things to different people. So some of you here today might be all set to hear about infographics. So, you know, something like this, for example, this certainly has impact. It's engaging, aesthetically, it's very impressive, and it's meaningful as well. It tells us something useful. If we want to write a best-selling novel, that is, we need to write into it death, love, unsurprisingly, and here, and a bit of betrayal. So the thing is, though, when it comes to communicating data in, you know, a business or organizational context for decision making, this type of visualization of data is typically going to be overkill. And creating something bespoke like this takes an awful lot of time and an awful lot of skill. And I'm guessing that many of you are recruited into your roles because of your skills in HR or your skills in data, and therefore you probably aren't also going to have sort of professional graphic design skills. So what happens is we often get things that end up looking a bit like this, certainly less artistic. We try and be a bit designy, we might add 3D, a bit of decoration on the wall, and whilst it might have impact, it's probably not the sort of impact that we're looking to achieve. So if we take then infographics out of scope, out of the equation, and come back to that word impact and think about what we are trying to achieve when we're communicating with data. First and foremost, we really want our audience to understand the insights that we found in our data. If we can't do that, if we can't make them understand, then it's going to have been an ineffective use of time for ourselves and for our audience, our stakeholders as well. But beyond just understanding, we want to really kind of fill them with confidence, make them feel like our findings are bulletproof, like they can really trust in it, and take away any sense of doubt, because when they feel like that, they're much more likely to take action. And after all, that is why we're often analysing data when we're communicating it, is because we want to make a difference. Otherwise, we're just creating something that's just another nice to know. So McKinsey recognised the importance of this. They used the term analytics translator that they coined back in 2018 to talk about, you know, to really acknowledge the challenge that there often is in organisations between, you know, the people at the data end when they're looking to communicate their findings, and there's sometimes frustration they can feel when, you know, the stakeholder can't see what they can see. You know, it's obvious here, isn't it? And yeah, at the other end, the stakeholder is there saying, what's this telling me? You know, what's the so what, and why am I getting more value out of my data? So, you know, I think this term translator is a really great analogy to keep in mind for what we need to be doing when we're using data to communicate. So McKinsey had talked about the luxury of it being a new must-have role, but I'm guessing for many of you, you won't have the translator role in your organisations, and we also want to adopt those skills for ourselves anyway. So in order to do that, you know, in a word, what we need to keep in mind is this idea of communicating with clarity. So I'm going to talk today about how we can bring clarity into the communication of data throughout the process of creating a visualization. And there's 4 steps I'm going to go through in turn. this might just sound very obvious. Of course we want to communicate data with clarity, but just because it's obvious doesn't mean it happens. And actually, in the vast majority of cases, in the vast majority of organizations, data isn't communicated with clarity. Here's an example I picked from the website of a really good organization. It's not bad organizations that communicate data badly. Really good organizations struggle with it too. And what this is presenting here is the response to some survey questions. So in our worlds, that could translate to any sort of people survey data that we need to communicate. And what we see here, sort of down the bottom in this right-hand bar, is something extremely successful. We've got an entirely band at the bottom, and a very extremely successful band above that. So something really positive I'm getting from here. Yet when we look across to the right hand side, what we see is not at all successful entirely. It's also in green, this color that suggests also it's something positive. So I'm not actually sure at all whether this green on the right hand side is a good thing or a bad thing, and it's certainly not making it clear to me. That's not, of course, to say that when I'm sure there's a very clever analyst behind this, and when they presented it, it's obviously think very compelling here for it to have ended up on this company's website. But what we don't want to do is to rely on that voiceover to get our point across and use that as a crutch. What we want to do is to make sure that our visualizations of data are kind of seamless and very easy for our stakeholders to understand. So the good news is that there's a sort of convergence of opinion on this. It's not just my opinion. You don't just have to take this from me, but in the data viz community, and there is a data viz community out there, the authors on the subject, the speakers on the subject, all talk about this really being a common goal, and that is to create for our stakeholders the greatest degree of understanding for them, but without them having to make a lot of effort. We want to make it effortless for them. So you might sort of question, well, why do we need to make it effortless? My stakeholders are smart, clever people, and data is complicated stuff. So why do we want to reduce effort? Well, we have to acknowledge that, not only have our stakeholders already got a lot going on in their minds already, focusing on a lot of their own initiatives, but also our cognitive capacity is limited. And when I say yes, our stakeholders, ours here too, our human cognitive capacity is limited. And without sort of detouring off into cognitive psychology, I can just sort of assure you there's plenty of evidence out there that shows we can't hold much in mind. We can't take a huge amount of new information in. And if we want our stakeholders to be, thinking about what we're sharing and thinking about how we're going to apply that, how they're going to apply that, we need to bear in mind they can keep about 3 chunks of information in mind. So if they're kind of trying to make sense of the axis scale, and there's sort of 3 or 4 different colors going on from they've got to look back and forth to a key to interpret, they're just not going to have the headspace to be able to understand, the so what of this, how they're going to apply this information. So the other thing about human cognition is we are, have tendencies to make errors and biases, and that's very normal. It's actually very helpful because it means we're being efficient in the vast majority of the time. But it can cause problems and it can cause misinterpretations. So Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, author of this best-selling book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he talks about 2 systems for thinking. System 1, which he refers to as the sort of fast, intuitive, pre-conscious thinking. So this is that automatic thinking that we do. And then versus system 2, which is much slower, more deliberative, and more logical. And we like to think fast, that's what we can do automatically. It's less effortful. So when we see a visualization like this out there in the world, Fox News, this one, then you know, we're instantly drawn, our system one instantly is drawn to the differing heights of these bars. And if we see on the right hand side, we've got a March 31st goal, which is, you know, significant height, and then way below it, you know, where we are now, March 27th, about a third of the way there it appears to be. That's what our system one notices and is drawn to straight away. So Obamacare enrolment is way behind target. Then our kind of slower, if we're motivated, that is, our slower system two kicks in, and we think, actually, so it's 6,000 versus 7,000, that's not a third. We're actually quite close to the target after all. And so, you know, if we notice that we feel like we've been tricked, we don't feel like we can necessarily trust the source anymore, and we're looking, you know, through subsequent information for where else we might be getting sort of tricked, or you know, where the numbers don't add up to 100 for 100%, for example. So we've lost the attention of our audience, and we've lost the trust of our audience. What we want to do is instead to create for them a sense that they can rely on us. What Daniel Kahneman talks about as a sense of cognitive ease. So this is about, you know, instilling trust in the message being communicated. Something feels familiar, true, good, and effortless. And that's what's going to make our stakeholders feel sort of really comfortable and confident, you know, build that relationship, that trusted relationship with us, so they feel they can take action off the back of what we're saying. So if we've got, you know, a relatively, well, very small data set like this, we've got 6 data points, employee overhead split by region and division here. So we might think, okay, so this is cognitive ease, this is a very simple data set, clarity already, is, you know, this isn't what we're talking about. We'd actually be wrong, because if, you know, we took this information to, or this page to a room full of people and asked what their takeaway message is, the chances are we're going to get 5 or 6 different takeaway messages, and a sense of anxiety that each of those people might have focused on the wrong thing. Just to give you an idea, someone might be focusing on, you know, the total overhead in store versus online overall. What do they add up to? Someone else in the Americas region might be thinking, oh, okay, so online overhead is higher for us than store overhead, and that's different to EMEA, where store overhead is much higher. And someone else might be thinking, oh, look, it's the same in Asia Pac. We've got matched 2 million overhead with the store online, etc. So as you can see already, there's many different messages or takeaways from this simple data set. So it's not enough to just put this on a page and expect our audience to feel comfortable and confident that they've got the right message. If we visualize this data, quick disclaimer, these are Excel defaults, not necessarily what I would advocate at all, but just here, just to give you a sense of, you know, the variety of different chart types that we have to reflect that, again, that very small data set. It's all exactly the same data in each of these 9 charts, and we could do many more, of course. So if I ask you which is the, you know, what's the best way of visualizing that data, many people will focus in on their favorite chart type. Lots of people like pie charts, so they'd pick this one up in the top right. But actually, if we did want to make accessible that message that we've got the same overhead in Asia Pac of 2 million store and online, it's not available to us there because we've got proportions and the orange segments don't look the same size. However, if we look to this one on the top left, you know, it's immediately obvious to us. We can see that insight now. We can see that we've got the same overhead in Asia Pac for store and online. So does that make that chart the best way to communicate this data then? Well, if our message is that store overhead overall is much higher than online overhead, then we're looking to this middle row on the right hand side, this sort of world doing a better job where we've combined all of our 3 regions together. It's much easier to see that insight in this chart in the middle right. So then, in answer to our question, which is the best chart, which is the best way to visualize that data set, it absolutely depends on our message. We can only answer that question. We can only select a chart when we know what we want to communicate. We therefore need to be really specific with the message that we intend to communicate. So we need to start with that message or that headline, perhaps, really thinking of it in terms of perhaps a newspaper headline, because they are things that are written, in a very sort of punchy way. They're succinct. They tell us something. They generally have something that's a short soundbite. It might have a single stat in it, something that can be retweeted or repeated, that's memorable. Often gives us a context, a sense of whether something's good or bad, and they're all things that we want to be able to do when we're communicating a message to our audience. Not just a title or description of the data of what's there, but really sort of saying something. And this is often not done, I have to say. So once we've got our headline, kind of taking the midpoint here, from there we can visualize our data. But what you'll see here is this distinction between two different types of data visualization. And this distinction is not made often enough. And that is between the explanatory data visualization, following the headline. So we're explaining the headline, we're choosing a chart which really explains what we found. But of course, to find that headline and to come up with that sort of insight message headline in the first place, we're going to have had to do quite a lot of exploratory work in our data. This is the stuff we do in our spreadsheets. It's kind of the defaults. It's a bit, messy and not, or shouldn't be, the stuff for our stakeholders' eyes. So this is where we come up with the insights, we create our headline or a narrative, and then we should be creating a data visualization that is intended for our stakeholders to really effectively communicate that headline. And so when we talk about communicating with impact, this is what we're talking about, this explanatory stuff that's really designed intentionally to communicate a message. So the first part then, as I said, we're going to go through the 4 parts of how we can bring clarity to the visualization of HR data. It has to start with a message. It has to start with a clear message or headline that we want to communicate to our stakeholders, that's relevant to our stakeholders. And only then can we go on to chart it. So in charting and bringing clarity to charting, what we mean here is really sort of selecting a chart and choosing design features that make the message really accessible, that make it intuitive to our audience. And we're often not great at doing this because we love the detail, or the majority of us who have do data for a living anyway, really like to kind of see it as a puzzle, to enjoy the complexity, enjoy the process of searching for the insights. And often this is the stuff, this is the exploratory stuff that ends up on the page in our presentations. And this, of course, is not what we want to have in our presentation. This is what we could think of as letting the data speak for itself. And the reason that doesn't work, there's a frequently cited sort of cautionary tale about the dangers of letting data speak for itself. And it's about this man here called Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis. He was a Hungarian doctor who worked in the sort of mid-19th century. And it was a time when something called childbed fever was rife. And childbed fever was tragically taking the lives of many new mothers shortly after giving birth, and no cause for this was known. But what Dr. Semmelweis noticed was that the death rate was higher in the units that were led by doctors than the units led by midwives. And so he hypothesized that perhaps there were some sort of poisonous particles on the hands of doctors because they'd been operating on quite ill patients beforehand. And so he suggested if they wash their hands, then that might make a difference. This was before germ theory had been discovered. So in his own clinic, he made this change, and sure enough, the death rate dropped. So this is great news. He's got data to back this finding up, it is extremely valuable, you know, in terms of saving lives, the impact of this. And it's also very actionable. All the action that needs to be taken to make this change is for doctors to wash their hands. But when Dr. Semmelweis shared this with the wider medical community, he was ridiculed, struck off, and unfortunately, nothing changed until germ theory was discovered many years later. So I don't know, enough about how Dr. Semmelweis actually presented his data, but we can imagine, something like this, where numbers, tables of information are sort of put in front of people. Look, we can see, it's obvious, it's in the data, it's here, isn't it? We've all experienced either firsthand as a recipient being faced or presenting data like this and expecting our stakeholders, our audience to understand. And quite frankly, it's just overwhelming. It's too much. We don't know where to look, and it can feel quite intimidating. If, on the other hand, he had turned those numbers into a visualization, it makes that data much more accessible. It makes the meaning in the data more accessible, and it's much more compelling. Henry Hubbard, creator of the periodic table, says it really well here. He talks about there being magic in graphs. The profile of a curve reveals in a flash a whole situation, the life history of an epidemic, a panic, or an era of prosperity. The curve informs the mind, awakens the imagination, and convinces. And it's for these reasons that I would absolutely advocate always sort of visualizing data. It makes that insight so much more accessible. The problem is when it comes to selecting a chart to visualize our data, there are so many to choose from, and software providers often pride themselves on their huge selection of charts that they have available for us to choose from, so it can feel quite overwhelming. But the good news here is we should think in terms of having a more sort of curated set to choose from, the sort that our stakeholders are really familiar with, because for explanatory purposes, we want to remove the friction in terms of interpretation. We don't want to be having to help our stakeholders through how they should actually even be interpreting a chart. We want to use the sorts of charts they're really familiar with. So one such example is the pie chart. Stakeholder, general, the pie chart is quite well liked. I know it's quite Marmite, and we're going to go into reasons for that. But what a pie chart does really well is it plays into that intuition of data being part of a whole. We're actually presenting a whole here, and that's what we want to be aiming for when we're selecting a chart, one that gets across the sort of message that we are looking to communicate. The problem with pie charts, though, is it's quite hard to determine the relative lengths or the relative areas, lengths of arcs, if you like. This is where the data is encoded here, of these 7 data points that we have. So if I was to ask you which category contributes the most to sales, it's quite challenging. You might think it's a trick, they're all the same, or perhaps the color segments that have the stronger colors are drawing your eye more. If I present that data to you in a bar chart instead, the answer to that question is immediately accessible, and we don't need the numbers on top of the bars to tell us. If I asked, what percentage approximately does category B contribute to total sales, it's challenging, right? Even for sort of very data literate people. We can see there's 7 segments, but can we quickly work out what a 1/7 of 100 is? Probably not. But if we present this data again, come back to that bar chart with those kind of subtle grid lines on, we can very easily read off here that sales in category B are kind of just over 14%, much more accessible. Other reasons to be cautious with pie charts. I've deliberately chosen a bad example here where we've got a huge amount of color, but a huge amount of color is really necessary here because we've got so many segments. Notice that wouldn't be necessary if we go back to our bar chart because all bars are the same color and we've got the labels next to our bars. Can we, if you have, you know, great vision, distinguish between the 3 shades of green on there? I don't know. If you're colorblind, I'm pretty confident you wouldn't be able to. We've also got, you know, this sort of having to look from side to side, key to graph. It looks a bit clunky and messy. We've got some labels outside of the segments, some inside of the segments. So lots of reasons to be very cautious and not use pie charts. But, you know, as I said before, it does make it obvious the components sum to 100%. You can do that on a bar chart as an alternative by making it clear in the title. You know, we say here distribution of sales by category, for example. But I'm not saying never use a pie chart. You know, they just require caution. They work well when it's important to represent the whole. Each segment differs considerably in size, so it's not subtle. I'd say a maximum of 3 segments. We don't want to need this, you know, large color scheme. Sometimes I saw this example on a website which was for a co-working space, and I thought, oh, that works really nicely. So for precisely the reasons that I've said, pie charts, you know, we need to be cautious around. Here works well, and I think it's because, you know, the message here is about communicating a diverse and colourful whole. You know, all of this range of different industries that this co-working space has working there, and the precision of the actual values isn't important. It's just saying that we've got a nice colourful mix. So rather than hard and fast rules when it comes to choosing charts, I think it's often about optimizing trade-offs, and it's always about sort of coming back to that message you want to communicate and making sure it's really accessible. We haven't got time, obviously, to talk about a whole range of chart types, but one that I just wanted to cover, which I really like and is relatively underused, is this what's called a dumbbell plot, because they look like little dumbbells. And what we see here is we've got 2 data points for each department. And the go-to for this, what we would often see, is 2 bars side by side. But what that doesn't allow you to see as easily as this does is the relative difference between, you know, the 2 points in time that we've got plotted. So this really draws attention to the difference based on the length of the difference line, the length or the width of the dumbbell. So again, this is coming back to this point of choosing a graph, and that's a particularly good graph for difference, for making the interpretation of data more accessible, more intuitive, you know, appealing to that system 1 that Daniel Kahneman talked about, and more likely to achieve clarity. Okay, so the third area then that we want to focus on when we think about bringing clarity to our charts is decluttering, removing the clutter. So Edward Tufte, if any of you have come across him before, he talks about the concept of chart junk, and these are for him the visual elements that are not necessary to comprehend the information in the graph. They're the redundant bits of ink on the page or on the screen. I like to sort of channel the Marie Kondo idea of decluttering to bring joy to the page, bring lightness. Another analogy which I think is great comes from product design, you know, from this school of thought in particular, talks about most of all good design is as little design as possible. So, you know, all of these different ways of advocating for less being more, for bringing, for stripping back our charts and taking away the clutter. So let's see, you know, a real example in a graph of what this looks like. So this is a really simple data set again. I've sort of used Excel because I'm sure the majority use that as a tool, sometimes for visualizing data. And the default is full of chart junk. So this is the latest version of Excel. The previous one had a lot more chart junk on it. So this is a good looking Excel. This is an improved Excel here. So what do we mean by chart junk when we look at this? What could we remove and take away? Well, you know, the border, first of all, doesn't need to be there. So let's take that off, and immediately it looks sort of lighter and cleaner and softer on the page. The labels here, the numbers on the left-hand side, are quite dominant. So, you know, the first thing to say about them is they're this kind of heavy black. So we can just make them a grey, softer and, you know, aesthetically nicer. So they're still quite dominant because they're large. So let's reduce the font size. And when we do that, the default fills in. So we get all the numbers there every 10% rather than every 20%. So it feels too cramped now. So we're going to sort of iterate and take the numbers away, but keep it that smaller font size. I'm sure you've noticed there that decimal place, hopefully you have, on the left-hand side in the axis. It's totally unnecessary. I didn't force that in. That goes in by default. We don't need it there. That's clutter or chart junk, so let's get rid of that. The grid lines, they're kind of these straight lines. They're not too heavy. I've seen a lot worse, but they still might grab our attention. We want to think about, is this how we want them to appear? Do we need them at all? Maybe we could add values instead. For me, this feels a bit cluttered now, so perhaps we will go back to grid lines, but here I've just made them more subtle. So you can do that by reducing the intensity of the font color, or the line has become dotted. So just a bit more muted. They're just more optionally available now rather than kind of shouting at us. So let's look at the legend. It's kind of blue is on top of red, whereas our bars, we've got blue to the left of red. So let's just align it with the order. And again, it helps to make the reading of the graph more accessible. Question the colors. If I ask you what you think of them, I mean, they look very default. They don't look a bit lazy. We haven't made any sort of intention with them. What's really nice is the red, well, what's not nice at the moment is the red is shouting out to us, and red often means bad, but red is a control. So a nice thing to do with control is mute it, push it into the background with a grey. So we've done that, given blue to the test group, but at the moment it's still quite muted and it needs more contrast to the control. A, to make it kind of stand out more, but B, again, thinking about accessibility for those who are visually impaired. If we've got an intensity difference, not just a colour difference, it's more inclusive. So the legend now is pretty much hygiene. Yes, we want to keep it there, but we're not having to rely on looking back and forth as we interpret the information. It's more intuitive. So now we might want to think about the order of bars. I don't know if it's the kind of thing that many people don't even consider. We just accept how it's come up default wise. But if we've got test first, then control. But actually, it makes sense to sort of have the control as a baseline, and then we see what the uplift to the test performance is. So simply switching the bars around, we get this different effect. Is the axis necessary? Edward Tuff would say no. He would call it chart junk and take it away. For me, it gives me comfort. I feel a bit nervous that someone's chopped the axis on me here, so I like to see it back in. So there's our kind of before and after. We've made, with a few clicks, a cleaner and more intentional design. You might think, well, it's not that different, and you're right, it's not that different, but I just wanted to kind of emphasize a few things that we can do that often just get overlooked, and it really doesn't take long to create something that is much cleaner as a starting point. Here's another example with that kind of stepping through all the steps, but we often see this sort of clutter on the left hand side, and this can end up in a presentation without just spending a few minutes to give consideration as to what chart junk we can take away from it. So the difference between the left and right hand side, you can see I've taken all the numbers off. Do we really need all of these values? I've kind of looked at the axis on the left hand side and removed, so I've allowed a zero line in there, so we've actually got an axis that's visible. We've got dotted lines. I've labelled directly the data lines rather than needing a key underneath. I've made the title take up just a single line so that the data has more space rather than it feeling quite squashed in as we've got on the left hand side. And I think the most notable thing is having this kind of year-on-year growth written at every single data point that's been taken out on the right hand side and just moved into the title. I can hear like a bit of background noise, so I just want to say it's not me. I think someone's not on mute, so apologies for that. But if everyone could just make sure they're on mute in case it's distracting other people, that would be great. Okay, so what we've done in these last two examples is really focus on aesthetic cleansing. But I also just want to share quickly an example where it's not just about the aesthetic. It can be about the precision and clutter in the data as well. So if I ask you here for this example to see it, what's the difference in role mix between 2018 and 2019? It's quite hard to answer that question, right? If I narrate your thought process is what I expect you're thinking. Your eye might be drawn to the blue because it's the largest of the colours that's standing out, and that's lead. So you might think, okay, so there's a lot more leads in 2019, but what else? Oh, but there's fewer managers because that's standing out because that's yellow. Oh, and now my eye's drawn to the bottom. Senior managers are down at the top, associates are up, directors are I'm lost. Coming back to the idea of being able to keep 3 chunks of information in mind, I've already forgotten, what the first thing is, and I can't interpret anything meaningful from this other than there's been a change in role mix from 2018 to 2019. So the precision that we've given here with 8 data points is a trade-off actually for understanding. If instead we give sort of 3 levels of seniority difference, so you can see here I've classified these 8 role types into either junior, manager, or leadership, and given default colours, horrible colours, not my choice, but we can start to get a sense of how the 3 different colours change from left to right, not in this form. So if we kind of group those together and then take away that detail so we can just see leadership, manager, and junior, I'm going to change it to blue because I think it's more professional, it's more refined, but it's also more meaningful. So here I have, I only need 1 colour, not 3, and I've varied the intensity. So I've got a highest intensity for the highest level of seniority. So there's meaning in this colour scheme as well. So I've tweaked it a bit aesthetically. I've kind of just, not had so much space between the bars that we've got here, so they've come closer together, given a bit more breathing space into the key. And I've put some labels on now, and we can see in the right hand side, that the management layer has been squeezed, and that's the key difference between 2018 and 2019. That insight now is instantly accessible, where it wasn't when we were giving sort of too much information, too much clutter, too much precision, unnecessary information in the data. So what we're doing on the right hand side here then is, kind of coming back to that idea of system 1 versus system 2. We're making it accessible to the fast brain. It's intuitive and pre-conscious. Okay, so our 4th and final element of data viz design where we want to bring clarity is focus. So here's a data set, a bit of a different data set, but if I ask you how many times the number 8 appears here, kind of searching, it's a bit uncomfortable, but if I do this, it immediately helps you focus on what I've asked you to focus on, which is the number 8. So what that is using is something called pre-attentive attributes. So I am allowing you to, I'm drawing your eye, I'm drawing your attention pre-consciously to what I want you to look at. And there's different techniques. It's not just about using kind of black ink to do that. There's all these different types of pre-attentive encoding to draw your focus. So enclosure is one, for example. We can use a different shape. Again, that's drawing your attention to the 8. They have different strengths, and colour is a really strong way to draw attention. However, if we have a lot of colour on a page, it's less effective. For colour to be effective, you've got to use it sparingly as a way to draw attention. So if we apply the use of pre-attentive attributes to our graphs, oops, sorry, wrong way. And I ask you here, where's your eye drawn to? I know we're all looking at 2015. I can be much more confident. It doesn't need a big, shouty, red arrow in the middle of the page. All it needs is a nice, subtle, sophisticated point that draws your attention. If I ask you here where your eye is drawn to, probably less sure. There's only 4 data points, but I'm not sure which one I should be looking at, the highest maybe or the lowest. If I do this and remove some of the detail, it's focusing your attention on campaign form. As I said before, colour is really effective at drawing attention. So if we do that, you know, it's popping more. But we want to use a colour that is kind of it's semantically resonant with the message, and that helps us process the information fast. So when we see red, we're primed to think it's bad in this, you know, culture anyway. So sort of tune, and when I say culture, you know, it could be organizational culture. Perhaps certain brands have different meanings, and it instantly makes you think of something. So being really mindful of those intuitive perceptions. But also thinking about our base color here, we had blue for bars. Grey is a really great background color. It makes that foreground color pop more against it. The priority, though, as I said before, is to make the meaning accessible for visually impaired viewers. So here we've got high contrast. It's not saying don't use color, so we can still use red, but making sure it's a red that has, you know, a difference in intensity and not just the hue. So we always want to be cautious when using the sort of red, amber, green. Colorblind viewers are going to really struggle to see the difference. You know, this is the sort of thing they might experience, which really isn't helpful at all. And also when we have, you know, these sort of the RAG statuses that we often see applied, they're kind of quite shouty, and it makes everything feel important, and when that's the case, nothing stands out. So if instead we push things into the background, we use colour more intentionally and more sparingly, it can really help us sort of focus in on where to look. So doing all these things makes what you might have thought of as boring bar charts feel less boring. They're not going to be boring anymore when they're created intentionally, when they communicate a message effectively, when that message is intuitively available. And then the focus can be on the so what, on the action. What are we going to do about these insights? They communicate meaning. So in summary, then, we've brought clarity to the visualization of data through our message or headline at the start, in our choice of charts, again, making that message really intuitively accessible, decluttering to increase clarity, and creating a focal point so our audience, we're all looking at the same thing. We can be sure we're all looking at the same thing. So yeah, I say that's it. I know I've gone slightly over, but if anyone has any questions, yeah, I'd be very interested to hear.
Kerry, that was lovely. Thank you very much for walking us through data visualization in a very short space of time. And I have to say, you did make that look very easy, which is a sign that it's certainly a skill to get this right. I think a lot of us are guilty of, using the same old format, time in, time out, just force of habit. But so it's very interesting that you highlighted different techniques that are relatively straightforward, use of different colors and stripping out a lot of chart junk, as you put it, can make your message a lot easier to understand and less for you to actually talk to explain it, which is all good. So thank you very much for that. And we've had lots of comments through to me thanking you for this. They've found it very, very useful. So these slides will be available. I will circulate them so people can go through them. And I'm sure we would all want you on our team to help with making presentations. So thank you very much. Now we have got about 5 minutes for questions. So if you do have any questions, send them through to me. I have had a few. Some of them are along the same lines. So I will mention those in a minute. But one that's come through from Jenny. Thank you very much, Jenny. You said you just wondered if Kerry had any tips for useful resources for colleagues who aren't data professionals but need to present as part of their role.
So, I mean, sharing this sort of presentation, as you said, it's going to be available afterwards, because I think it is a very much, condensed 4 quick tips, if you like. There's and obviously there's lots of great books out there, but are colleagues going to want to read a long book with all this sort of information in? There's things like Makeover Monday, some sort of competitions about where data is given to those that want to take part, and they can create a new graph or image based on this data to visualize it in an effective way, so you can get a sense of all the different ways to visualize one data set and the difference that different things can do to enhance a message. However, again, I think that is for the keenies. I think perhaps just creating from this your own version of 5 or 10 top tips that you think are the most important and feel like the most relevant for your organization. Some organizations are really great at certain aspects of this. They might have a software tool that creates things in a really clutter-free way, so aesthetically it's already really nice, but in terms of like highlighting the focal point is something that really isn't happening and can be quite transformational. Actually, another organization might be around the headline part and really getting that right, but often it's not just one quick win. It is kind of recognizing it as a specific exercise that really needs an investment of time. Otherwise you are going to get lost in translation. That's exactly why McKinsey talk about the translator being this new sort of must-have role, because there are lots of aspects to it. I've gone through it quite quickly, but obviously I could say a lot more about each of those topics and beyond. So unfortunately it's like no quick fixes, but getting people interested and aware, because it's often a blind spot as well, I'd say that. So getting people to recognize that it is a problem is the first step to overcoming.
Thanks very much, Kerry. Thank you.
Thank you. That's absolutely right. We've got members who, some do have marketing departments, some do have data people to help them, others don't. So it's a question of resources and what can you turn to quickly to present your data. And I know, and a few people have mentioned this, are software that's out there like Tableau or Power BI. What's your opinion on those?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, they're the kind of tools that are great at making that surface level of aesthetics really good, but you've still got to be mindful that they're not going to be able to choose the chart type for you. You've still got to make that decision yourself, and that's still got to be based on being really good at the analytics. So you've got a headline, you know what you want to say, you've really understood the stakeholder. And similarly, when it comes to cleansing the data, like knowing how to group up the data to give the right amount of detail, that's another sort of decision that you need to make as the communicator of data. And then kind of creating that focal point too. So the tools are great enablers. They enable it to happen much more efficiently, often in an automated way, but you still got to take the sort of time to do those additional things, not assume that it does everything for you and it'll answer everything.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes presentations are a bit of a rush job, and if you invest the time up front, it can be worth it down the line for other presentations. And it just, people need to be quite brave really to throw themselves in and get stuck in, because it can be quite challenging and off-putting when you've got lots of data and you don't really know how to present it, and you sometimes end up just presenting a chart or giving handouts, and it doesn't really get your message across. So yeah, certainly trying to work with other people in your team will make it a lot easier. How
they interpret it, so you're kind of getting that direct feedback, and it kind of helps you to start to think in a more empathic way around how the sort of errors that someone else might accidentally fall into by looking at your creations.
Yeah, lovely. I'm just going to unmute everyone, and we'd just like to give you a round of applause. If everyone could do that, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, everyone. Very much appreciated.
Thank you. So that just leaves me to share my final few slides with everyone, if everyone can see that. So there will be a debate on the LinkedIn forum for everyone who's come along today. And Kerry has kindly made herself available for the next 24 hours. So she'll be on there to answer any questions and follow up with her in the next 24 hours. She'd be more than happy to help you. As I said, this has been recorded, so if you want to go back and look at some of the other parts of the presentation, I will be uploading this to the GRN YouTube channel in the next few hours, so you'll be able to listen back and share it with your team as well. And finally, if you can keep this date free for our next webinar on Wednesday, the 25th of August, we're having a work visa legal update as things are changing with immigration rules. We've spoken to an HR legal expert, Dipesh Shah from JMW Solicitors LLP, and he'll be talking for 30 to 40 minutes about everything you need to know if you have candidates that need permission to work in the UK, and everything about the new changes to the work visas. So that's Wednesday, the 25th of August, the usual time, 12:30 till 1:30. Kerry, thank you once again for sharing your insights. Very, very useful. Everyone who's come along today for sharing your time with us and putting questions in the forum. It's great to engage with you all. So enjoy the rest of your day and look forward to speaking to you again at the next webinar. Thank you.